From Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford, this is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. Imagine this. It's 2 a.m. and your phone rings. Who is calling this early and why? And your heart starts racing. It's a number you don't recognize. You pick up and hear,
"Hello? I am calling from the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences in Stockholm, Sweden. On behalf of the Nobel Prize Committee, I am pleased to inform you that you will be awarded a Nobel Prize. Congratulations."
Now, of course, in the real phone call, they tell you which of the 6 categories you won: peace, literature, physics, chemistry, medicine, or economics. And what do you win? Besides being a Nobel Prize laureate forever, you get a medal, a diploma, and a little more than $1 million. But let's back up real quick to get some context. Who is Alfred Nobel, and why is his prize such a big deal? Nobel was a Swedish inventor best known for creating dynamite, an invention that had both constructive uses and destructive consequences. It's believed that later in life he regretted the harm that it caused, so he left his fortune to honor those who would make the world a better place. Some notable American recipients of the Nobel: Presidents Barack Obama, Jimmy Carter, and Theodore Roosevelt, Martin Luther King Jr., Elie Wiesel, Ernest Hemingway, Bob Dylan, and Toni Morrison. And today you'll meet 2 more, Andrea Ghez and Martin Chalfie. In 2008, Martin received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, alongside 2 other scientists, for the discovery and development of a fluorescent protein, originally discovered in the bodies of jellyfish. Before these developments, to do lab experiments on cells, the cells had to be dead. But now we can use that fluorescence to follow the development of organisms as they grow and reproduce. The science was illuminating, literally. We'll get to Martin's work later in the show, but first meet Andrea Ghez. Along with Reinhard Genzel, she won half of the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy. And if you're not an astrophysicist and have no idea what that means, it has to do with black holes. Andrea is a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Lauren B. Lightman and Arthur E. Levine Chair in Astrophysics at the University of California, Los Angeles. And as of 2023, she is one of only 64 women to receive the Nobel Prize. That's out of 992 total recipients. I asked her what was going on the moments before she got that call.
I was fast asleep and my home phone rang. So you might ask, why do I still have a home phone?
That was my next question. Yes, go ahead.
But I have to say, getting a phone call in the middle of the night, and this was 2 a.m, October 2020, like if you can put yourself back, that was COVID pre-vaccines. You get a phone call in the middle of the night. What's your first thought? Or at least for me was, who's sick or who's really in trouble. So it didn't take very long for me to figure out that's not the kind of phone call it was. And that this was great news, really exciting news.
Wait, were you able to tell because they had the accent?
No, I think they had to explain it to me. I was very sleep deprived, but it's super exciting once you understand. It's breathtaking. I think I was completely flummoxed, speechless, or not coherent speech. And they invited me to partake in the press conference that was happening at 3 a.m. my time. It was suggested to me that I think about what I wanted to say and didn't want to say to the press. And of course, I still hadn't got my head around having won it. So what did I do? I went and made myself a cup of coffee.
Good. How do you take your coffee?
Straight. Black.
Black, like the night sky.
Like the night sky. Indeed. And in fact, that press conference, I don't think I'll ever forget either. In particular, the first question. The first question was, really told me that the Nobel Prize is a whole different beast from any other prize I'd gotten.
The importance of science and the belief in following the facts is quite crucial at this moment in the United States where science is somewhat in doubt. What message do you have maybe today?
And I thought, oh my goodness, this is not a question about physics or astrophysics. I'm now being asked a question that's clearly about scientific leadership and what does the science community have to say. So that was a wake-up call in terms of what was going to come the rest of the day. And it's a barrage. I mean, it's your cell phone blows up, your email blows up, both from colleagues, friends, and then reporters who want those interviews. So it was a interesting all on day, week, and quite frankly, for the following year. I mean, it tapers off a lot, but your life is transformed in a lot of ways.
After you got the call that you won, who was the first person you told?
My kids.
Do you think they saw you any differently?
No. Yeah, absolutely not.
When was the moment where you wrapped your head around it? Did that moment come yet?
Which I'm still wrapping. I think that moment of that first question was really important in terms of my understanding the role that this prize plays. It wasn't quite wrapping my head around, but a wake-up call around this is actually quite different. And it's kind of interesting to get this kind of recognition in the middle of COVID, because of course your life is so upended anyway. But it was so nice to have positive news to share in the middle of this really miserable moment when we were all confined to our homes and in a moment of a lot of uncertainty, like not understanding, what was coming.
Nobel Prize laureates, especially in science, don't tend to be a very diverse crowd. You were only the fourth woman to be awarded a Nobel Prize in physics at the time. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm delighted. Being fourth means that that brought the percentage of women up to 2%. That means that there's a whole gender overlay in terms of the requests that are coming in. And I've always felt very strongly about being a visible role model, because often people, ask you for your opinion about what it means to be a woman in physics. Well, I don't know. I'm a physicist. I don't study gender, but I do think that being a visible role model is a great way of encouraging young women into science. So I've actually done all my teaching at the introductory level, because I think it's really important to show both the young women and the young men that scientists can look like all sorts of people.
Was there a part of you that was like, oh my God, me? And was there also a part of you that was like, took you long enough?
Oh God, not a second, not even close. Definitely not. Much more of the first in terms of holy mackerel. Really? I mean, I was delighted. And you don't have much time to think. I mean, you really don't, because it's like this tidal wave that comes your way. So I think it's both the thrill and then the trying to get your wits about how you're going to talk about this, how you're going to describe your research. So I guess that was really the initial focus, is how do you manage this thing that's just hit?
Now, because this was 2020, normally you'd be able to go to Stockholm to get your prize, but because of the pandemic, I believe you were in a friend's backyard when you were kind of remotely presented with the prize. How did that go?
Yeah, in fact, there was so much uncertainty about how it would go. I mean, initially there was clarity that there was not going to be a big celebration in Stockholm, but the initial thinking was maybe all the US people would go to Washington, D.C., and then that quickly moved to, well, all the California folks are going to go to San Francisco. And the whole idea about these meetings was to film it in a way that could be streamed on December 10th, the anniversary of Nobel's death, which is when the ceremony is always timed to. We were going to film this in San Francisco on a Tuesday so that it was going to be streamed on a Thursday. And Friday before, California went into lockdown. So there was no San Francisco or flying to San Francisco. But I have to say, it was just this delightful moment of pulling on your community to figure out how to do this. I had a friend who was a dean of the law school at the time. And, she said, well, why don't you read the lockdown orders? And so we did. And, there was an exception for filming. And I thought, well, this is, we're filming. And Los Angeles is full of people who know how to get that done. So um, found a friend who was willing to help us pull a permit. So, we even managed to do this above board. And actually, a couple who supports my research, their backyard, and they have a lovely backyard. So it just was just lovely all the way around.
Now, for someone whose knowledge doesn't really go beyond high school physics, I feel like the understanding of what you accomplished is pretty straightforward. You won for the discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy, a black hole in the Milky Way's galactic center. I could use just a little bit of clarification here. A supermassive black hole in our galaxy seems like not a great thing. Now, I don't want to be like not in my backyard about it, but from the little I understand about black holes, my body, which I am rather fond of, would not fare well in a close encounter with one of these things. So is this something we should be worried about?
I would say we should be celebrating it in the sense that we have a laboratory for understanding supermassive black holes that's right in our backyard, or, figuratively right in our backyard, but it's pretty far away. And it's so far away that there's no reason to have any concern about the black hole's bad effects or terrorists. I mean, black holes have really bad reputations. There's just fascinating things that happen near a black hole. But the one that always gets highlighted is the idea that if you were to fall in feet first, you would become stretched out. In fact, a process that we call spaghettification, which is very visual.
Perfect word.
You're torn apart. But you have to be really, really close.
So what's so good about black holes?
So black holes are fascinating because they really challenge our ideas of our description of the physical world. So we don't have the physics today to describe what a black hole is. So the reason that people in the field of physics are so fascinated with these objects, it's a place to move our frontier of knowledge forward.
Is there such a thing as a itsy bitsy teeny weeny little black hole?
Oh, yeah, there are different kinds of black holes. And in fact, generally, we talk about two kinds of black holes in astrophysics. One category have black holes that are just about 10 times the mass of the sun. And the thing that's so great about those is that they were predicted theoretically. In other words, when people were thinking about the evolution of really massive stars, they predicted that at the end of these stars' lives, actually, these things are quite spectacular. The outer layers explode as supernova, and the inner core collapses as what we call a stellar mass black hole. So like the mass of it is not too exaggerated. In contrast to the supermassive, which are the much more massive. So rather than being roughly 10 times the mass of the sun, they're 1,000,000 to 1,000,000,000 times the mass of the sun. And unlike the first class, they were not predicted from a theoretical perspective. There was no anticipation that we should discover these things in the universe. And it was experiment that revealed unusual activity at the center of galaxies that led people to hypothesize that supermassive black holes were driving this unusual activity, which of course then sends the theorist back and says, well, to describe what these supermassive black holes are. So I think those two kinds are a great demonstration of how science works. It can either start with theory and then follow up with experimentation or observation, or in this mode, it starts with the observations and then theory comes along. So there's just incredible interplay that's usually cyclical. It keeps going around and around. So the importance of this is the demonstration that these supermassive black holes actually do exist. And we've, in fact, moved the evidence or increased the evidence by a factor of 10 million. So that's a big step forward in terms of our confidence that these things exist. And it's right in our backyard. So unlike trying to study them in more distant galaxies where you don't have the detail, you can see all sorts of stuff at the center of the galaxy in terms of that interaction, which is why, of course, we can prove that it's there. We prove it first by discovering stars that are at the heart of the galaxy and then measuring how they move under the gravitational influence of the black hole. I mean, that happens just like stars orbiting the sun. It's just gravity, but you show that there's a lot more mass inside a much smaller volume, which is the proof of a black hole.
When you are at a party and you're being introduced to someone, and maybe your friend makes the introduction and says, oh, well, she's also won the Nobel Prize in Physics. First of all, does that ever happen where you're at a party and someone points it out? And if so, how does that feel for you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the kind of party and whether or not your friends know. It has happened. And of course, it does change the social dynamics, as one might imagine, because it puts you on a pedestal. So I guess the opportunity there is if people are curious or want to know more, it's an opportunity. But of course, for me, it's a little uncomfortable because it can also put you on this pedestal. So it's often hard to change or it's not hard. I mean, I guess I'm interested in making sure that I'm viewed as and interacted with others as a normal human being.
That was Andrea Ghez. In 2020, she won the Nobel Prize for Physics for the discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy. When we get back, what comes after the call, the fanfare, the recognition that you are now a Nobel Prize-winning scientist?
How do you use that visibility that comes, whether or not you want it or not, in a way that's meaningful, that speaks to you?
Plus, a glowing jellyfish inspires the science that changed the world. I talk with a biology professor at Columbia about learning that he'd been awarded a Nobel Prize.
Actually, somebody interviewed me and I said, who's the schnook that won the prize? I found out I was the schnook.
I'm Chion Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay with me. This is Audacious. I'm Chion Wolf. What in the world is it like to win a Nobel Prize? And what's life like after, when all of a sudden people put you on a pedestal and behave differently around you? What are you supposed to do next now that you've achieved this great big thing? Well, thankfully, we've got two people who can report from the field on that. In a little bit, you'll meet Martin Chalfie. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2008. But first, we're getting to know Andrea Ghez, who won the prize in physics in 2020 for the discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy, aka a supermassive black hole. Let's get back to our conversation. Do you have any tattoos?
Nope.
If you had to get a tattoo to save the world,
I would make it in the shape of the orbits. And in fact, the Nobel Museum makes these accessories that are in the theme of the prizes. So for the year I got it, they made a necklace in the shape of the orbits, which one of my sons actually got it for me at the museum without me knowing that it existed. So that was a super fun holiday gift.
What do you think is on the other side of a black hole?
This is an interesting question. And of course, what's been played with a lot over the years in Star Trek, going through a black hole, through a wormhole, and at the other side, and through a white hole, in terms of connecting the universe to itself in interesting ways. And of course, we can't prove this. So it is the realm of science fiction. But it is fun to think about the universe, which is both big in time and space, and presumably needs way more dimensions to describe than we typically think about in our everyday lives.
So the answer will remain in fiction and our imaginations?
For the extent that I can imagine. But of course, we've thought about so many things as being impenetrable barriers. So there may be some future point in humanity where people figure this out.
For those who this October will find out that they've won a Nobel Prize, what advice do you have for them?
Enjoy it and use the platform for something that's meaningful to you. People have moved forward with their careers in all sorts of different ways, but it's an opportunity to really think about, because it is disruptive, especially if you get it before you retire, what you want to do next. And I personally think these disruptive moments in our lives are so interesting to stop and reflect. When you're a kid, you have these big transitions. You graduate from high school, you graduate from college, and you really think about your next step. And then later in life, you have to be much more deliberate about stopping and thinking, unless something happens. And of course, in lots of adults' lives, that happens. But this is an example of one where there are going to come a lot of opportunities and requests, and you have to think about what's important to you. For me, it's been a lot about how do you preserve enough time to still do your research and yet take on the social responsibilities of being a visible role model as a woman scientist, because you are in that position. And so how do you do that in a reasonable way? You can't answer every email that comes from a seventh grader who wants to ask you, it's lovely, but I guess I think about, how do you do high impact? Because if you want to preserve your time to do science, there's 24 hours in the day. And I don't have the answer for this. I think I'm still thinking about this. How do you use that visibility that comes, whether or not you want it or not, in a way that's meaningful? It speaks to you, because you're the one who has to do it.
You were 4 years old at the time of the moon landing, and you've said that that's what really started your fascination with science. And there were a lot of kids in 1969 who reacted the same way, but they did not go on to make the discoveries and to have the accomplishments that you did. What do you think is different about you?
I think it's interesting how we tell our stories. Because while I can look back and point to the moon landings as a very influential moment, it didn't create in me a complete and obvious through line. So I think I was quite fascinated by thinking about the universe. In fact, I both fascinated and terrified. Actually, I think I found it a little bit awesome in the dual meaning of that. And, at similar times, I wanted to be a ballerina when I grew up. So I think what I ultimately discovered or understood about myself pretty early on is that I like puzzles. So astronomy and astrophysics is like this huge puzzle. So for me, I love a good mystery. I love it when I don't understand things.
Same.
That's that drive to figure the things out.
There's still that 4-year-old in you. What do you think she thinks about winning this prize?
Still, don't take yourself too seriously. I want to keep that 4-year-old self alive in me, the one that's curious and joyful in the prospects of figuring it out. You don't want to quench that.
Well, Andrea Ghez, thank you so much for talking with me.
Well, it's been so much fun. Thanks for the opportunity.
You could say that Martin Chalfie lit up when he found out he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2008. But it all started back in the 60s, when Dr. Osamu Shimomura made the discovery of green fluorescent protein, or GFP, in a species of jellyfish. He found that under ultraviolet or blue light, GFP causes the jellyfish to glow green. Years later, Tula Hazelrig, a professor of cell biology at Columbia University and wife of Martin Chalfie, made a significant contribution by demonstrating that GFP could be used as a marker to track proteins within living cells. This enabled scientists to observe the behavior of these proteins in real time inside living organisms. Martin Chalfie expanded on the idea of using GFP as a marker by demonstrating its use in making specific cells in living organisms glow. Later, Dr. Roger Chen modified GFP to create variants that glow in different colors, enabling more complex, multicolored tracking of proteins in cells. Those are a lot of people who've expanded the possibilities of the humble jellyfish, and changed the world. So, when we recorded this conversation back in June of 2023, I had to know what it was like for Martin Chalfie to hear the phone ringing at some ungodly hour, pick it up, and hear that he won.
I missed the phone call. I'd slept through the whole thing. I wake up at around 6:30 in the morning and I realized, oh, they must have announced who won the chemistry prize. I wonder who was the person who did it. Actually, somebody interviewed me and I said, who's the schnook that won the prize? And then I had my laptop near my bed and I picked it up and I opened it up and went to Nobel. So I found out I was the schnook that had the prize. So I found out by going online and seeing that I was one of the recipients, along with Shimomura and Chen. I should also say that I heard a phone ringing in the background, but softly. And I thought to myself, that's our upstairs neighbor's phone. Why doesn't the guy get up and answer it? It was our phone.
What time was it?
Around 6:30 in the morning. I didn't even look at my email because on the email, there was an email from the Nobel people saying, we've been trying to get you on the phone and you answer your phone. And anyway, that's the way the day started.
Now, you didn't grow up thinking, I'm going to win a Nobel Prize someday, right?
I certainly didn't. But what I've come to learn about the Nobel, which I think is the realization came to me a little later than maybe it should have. And that is, it does not go to the best, smartest scientist. It does not go, it's not a career development award or a recognition of a career in science. It's really given to the science that changed the way we do science. So there's a surprising number of Nobel laureates, if you read their biographies that are all on the Nobel site, where they say, I was doing this, and suddenly I noticed this, or this strange result happened. There was no plan to it, but they recognized it. Even Shimomura's discovery of GFP is a great example of this. These discoveries come sometimes when you least expect it. It may not be the focus of your research, but fortunately, there are people like Shimomura and many others who were able to realize, oh, there's something here. I should be looking at it. And with the work that I was part of and the work that Roger Chen was part of in making it an even more useful molecule, I think altogether, thousands of people have tried this, used that in their research, and it's helped their research. And I think it was that impact, that ability to change things, that fortunately the people in Sweden thinking about the chemistry prize decided to give it to the molecule. And that was wonderful. Glad to go along for the ride.
How did your wife react?
We were very happy. There was a lot of jumping around that day and sort of general happiness. And the actual ceremony itself is quite wonderful. I have to say, it's very organized. You start, I think, on December the 6th. The prize is actually given on the 10th, which is the anniversary of Nobel's death. And then there's a couple of many other things that are going on. But probably the most fun was that you're finished on the 9th, the day before the prize. You're finished at about 7 in the evening. And there has grown to be a tradition that each Nobel laureate rents a private room at a restaurant and has all of his or her guests come there. And so we had this wonderful meal together where people made fun of me for 3 hours straight. It was great. So it was a roasting, and we had a wonderful time. And it was nice to share it with friends and family and colleagues.
I wonder how you feel winning the Nobel Prize affected your self-esteem. Did winning it elevate your own spirit? Did it feel validating or something else?
Not in that sense. I didn't say, okay, now I'm worth it. That was not what happened. The Nobel had several consequences that I'm very grateful for. People now ask me to do interviews like this, and I've been given opportunities that I would not have had prior to the prize.
Like what?
I'm a member of both the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine in the United States. And for 47 years, they have had a committee that is made up only of members, which is called the Committee on Human Rights. It was started started 47 years ago when the then president of the National Academy of Sciences was concerned about the situation of Andrei Sakharov in the USSR and thought we should be speaking out for other scientists who have human rights abuses against them. The committee works on behalf of not members, but any social scientist, natural scientist, engineer, or health professional anywhere in the world, including the United States, whose basic and essential human rights have been denied. At the moment, we're working on behalf of 112 colleagues all over the world that have had serious abuses against them, sometimes for their work, sometimes because they've spoken out about injustice and then been arrested, and sometimes worse. And I was asked to join that committee after the Nobel. And then about a year and a half after I joined the committee, I was asked to be its chair. And so I have been that for the last almost 10 years. And it is harrowing work, but frankly, very rewarding. And every once in a while, we try to have a meeting with an ambassador from a country that we're concerned about. And I think the Nobel is a little bit of an entry card to be able to at least start a conversation. So I found this involvement to be very rewarding. I think it's important for people to speak out, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to participate in this. And so that's, I think, one of the really quite wonderful aspects of this, that the Nobel does give you some notoriety, some visibility, and that means that you can speak out and you can participate in a way that I might not be able to before. There's a couple of questions that people sometimes ask me about the Nobel. They say, well, now that you have the Nobel, did you just quit your job? You've reached the pinnacle of it. And I have to remind them that I worked on GFP for a very short amount of time and then continued the work on nerve development and nerve function. And I'm still fascinated by that. I'm still working on that. So no, it's not the pinnacle to what you worked on. The other thing, which I'm going to maybe disabuse you and other members of your audience, is every once in a while someone will ask the question in one form or another, how do you get a Nobel Prize? And I have to say to them, look, I don't know, and I'm going to prove it to you that I don't know how to do this. And they look a little puzzled when I say I'm going to prove it to them. I'm going to say, look, it was such a wonderful party. It's such wonderful recognition. If I knew how to get it, I would be getting my second and third because I'd want to keep doing it. And I haven't a clue as to how to get another Nobel Prize. So I didn't know how to do it. So you don't know. There's no life lesson here of how to get a Nobel Prize. You do experiments. You do the best you can. It's like the Damon Runyon line in all of his Broadway stories when I think it's Sky Masterson is asked by an out-of-towner, what do you do? And he says, he doesn't want to say, I'm a petty criminal. That's what I do. I have a crap game that I'm involved in. He always gives the same answer to what do you do? He says, the best I can. I think that's really the wonderful aspect about this. And that's what we get to do.
That was Martin Chalfie, In 2008, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his pioneering work in developing the use of green fluorescent protein, or GFP, as a tool in biological research. After the break, what does this Nobel laureate think it's important to tell students?
Be passionate. Be excited. Be as totally committed as you possibly can.
I'm Chion Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay tuned. This is Audacious. I'm Chion Wolf. Imagine hearing this, and it's addressed to you.
On behalf of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, I wish to convey to you our warmest congratulations, and I now ask you to step forward to receive the Nobel Prize in Chemistry from the hands of His Majesty the King.
Martin Chalfie experienced his Nobel moment in 2008 when he, along with Osamu Shimomura and Roger Chen, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the discovery and development of green fluorescent protein. Before this breakthrough, scientists struggled to observe what was happening inside living cells without killing them. But with GFP, they can now study cells in real time while they're alive. This leads to tons of new insights into how cells function, how diseases progress, and how treatments affect them. Martin and I have been talking about what it feels like to receive a Nobel Prize, something that fewer than 1,000 people have experienced since the prize's inception in 1901. Let's get back to our conversation. Is there anything, and I mean anything at all, about winning a Nobel Prize that sucks?
I think it's learning about one's own naivete. It's not frequently, but every once in a while, someone will invite you to something, and it turns out it's not exactly on the up and up. It's not exactly looking after students, maybe a for-profit way. And that's happened, now it's been almost 15 years since my Nobel Prize. I think 2 times in that time, there have been people that have wanted to use the Nobel for purposes that I really didn't feel were appropriate, maybe 3 times out of all this. And you have to be a little bit careful. You have to be a little bit wary. So that's the one thing that was it's the real world. It's something to realize is really part of all of this, is that sometimes people do want to take advantage, but by and large, it has been really wonderful. There's one other aspect that's really wonderful about the Nobel is I haven't changed any of my ideas, but now I get invited to give general talks. I get to talk to people about basic science and the importance of research. And this opportunity to talk more generally about science is a real gift, to be able to talk to undergraduates, to be able to talk to high school students, to be able to see different people and to interact with them really all over the world is an incredible gift that having this recognition has given me, and makes me very happy about that.
Has there ever been a time where you wanted to play the Nobel Prize card? Kind of like, dare I say, do you know who I think I am?
When I was an undergraduate, I was reading a paper by a faculty member that had just won the Nobel Prize, and it was his Nobel Prize speech. And I liked that. I was reading it with someone else, and they had said, well, what did you think about the paper? And I said, oh, well, I really liked it. I had a question about this one part, and I didn't understand this other part. And so the guy I was reading it with said, so you went and asked him, you talked to the Nobel laureate about this. And I said, I can't. I'm an undergraduate. I can't talk to him. And the guy looked at me and said, don't be an idiot. Go talk to the guy. I understand that there is a barrier that people have because this is something that's in the news every year. It's something that's considered a big deal. And so people withdraw a little bit. And I think that many of the laureates, I'm not alone in this, we want to break those barriers. We want to have ways that we can talk to people and enjoy their ideas and their conversation as much. So the answer to your question is I try as much as possible not to do this because I don't want to set up the barrier. That being said, there was one time when I was at a party and a friend of mine came up to me and said, "Oh, you should talk to that person over there. They're doing some really interesting things." I walked over to them and here I am, sort of older guy, and this was a younger person, and they basically ignored me the whole time. I couldn't find out about the work. I couldn't do anything. And then I finally got a word in. I said, "Are you going to be showing this anywhere that I could go see it?" And he said, "Oh, well, yes, I'm having an exhibit at this such and such a place on such and such a date." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I won't be able to go to that. I'm going to the Lindau Nobel laureate meeting." And all of a sudden he turned to me and ignored all the other people. And he said, "You?" And then I walked away. So yes, I've used it in one case because this guy was so arrogant about things. I usually try very hard to break the model, to break the expectation. So this Lindau meeting, by the way, is coming up in a couple of weeks. It's a wonderful opportunity. They invite many Nobel laureates to talk with about 700 graduate students and postdocs, and we had wonderful conversations. The first year I got there, I was going around, and all of a sudden, some of the young scientists that were there came up to me with their brochures for the meeting, opened up to the page where my little bio was, and they said, "Do we have an autograph?" Very surprising that anyone would want my autograph. Or others would come up and say, "Can we have a picture?" And I was just really somewhat flustered by all of this. So I said, "Sure, okay." And I did it. And I noticed the minute I signed the book, or the minute they had the picture taken, they ran off to get the other people. There was no real interaction. I was a collectible. And this bothered me a lot. So the next year when I went, I came prepared. They would come up, the same thing with the book or a camera, and say, can we have this?" And I'd say, "You can, but you have to pay me." And when they heard you have to pay me, this look of shock came over their face. How could I ask them to pay them? And I'd let that shock sink in because I loved seeing it on their face, to tell you the truth. And then I would say, the payment is you have to tell me about your research. And it stopped them in their tracks. And we had this wonderful conversation that would maybe be 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes 5, sometimes even 10 minutes long, because we were talking about something we were mutually interested in. And then I'd sign the book or have a picture taken, and then they would leave. Sometimes people would say, "Wait, can I tell you about my work?" And it became more meaningful for both of us. And so that's what I mean by sort of trying to break the mold, say something a little outrageous to stop them, and then really get a chance to talk to them and to interact, which I think is the whole point. And so, yes, sometimes I've used the Nobel in strange ways.
I wonder how you relate to being identified with winning a Nobel Prize. I mean, it is something to be proud of. It is really cool. And you've played a role in developing something that has never-ending possibilities. And it is so cool, and you should be happy. But I wonder how you feel about being defined by it. Like, at the end of your life, when your obit runs in the New York Times, it's going to have Nobel Prize in it.
yes, this, for people that don't know you, it's nice to have that one little tag that does it. For people that know you, they know much more about you and everything. And I think that's really important. I would hope that the work I've been doing with the Committee on Human Rights and how that has changed is affected. I've been here at Columbia now 41 years. I hope that some students came out with appreciating where I affected their lives, just as I was affected by the teachers that I had. I think there's many, we never know all the effects we have. We never know how we've influenced or affected other people. And that will be remembered at all is actually pretty nice, to tell you the truth. But if you're saying, do you like to be pigeonholed? No, I don't think anyone does. I think we're all very complex individuals, and there's many aspects of it. And we have interests and loves and activities that we do that other people may know very little or nothing about. And that's what human life is. So I'm grateful that there will be anything that there's been an effect, but I don't have any real control over that.
Well, I have asked everything I planned on, and I'm so grateful for your time. Is there anything we haven't talked about or anything you want to leave our listeners with?
We do a horrible thing to talented students. We say to them, follow your passion. And I know that when I was growing up, if anyone had said that to me, my reaction would have been, I'm going to make a mistake if I don't know what my passion is. Please tell me what my passion is and I'll follow that. But I don't know what my passion is, and yet I've been told follow my passion. I think that's the wrong phrase. I think the right phrase is be passionate, be excited, be as totally committed as you possibly can.
Well, Martin Chalfie, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you. Take care. This has been very enjoyable.
A very special thank you to Audacious producer Jessica Severin de Martinez, whose voice you heard in that phone call in the intro. She's often drawn to shows that are extremely difficult to produce, but this one was especially challenging. For reasons unknown to us, maybe they're, busy improving the world or something, Nobel Prize laureates were almost impossible to book for this episode. Jessica invited more than 30 people to join us. So thank you to Andrea and Martin for giving us such enthusiastic yeses, and thank you to Jessica for never giving up on a great idea. And if there were a Nobel Prize for public radio shows about Nobel Prize winners, you would win hands down. Audacious is also produced by Meg Fitzgerald, Robin Doyon-Aitken, and Meg Dalton at Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford. Special thanks to Mark Abrahams. He's the brains behind another episode you may love, the Ig Nobel Prizes. These are awards given to researchers who make people laugh and then think, including a conversation with one intrepid scholar who finally answered the eternal question of why wombats make cubed poop. And speaking of winning, you can hear what it's like to win a new car on The Price is Right, solving the puzzle on the Wheel of Fortune, and not winning against one of the best Jeopardy contestants of all time. Those episodes and more can't wait to win your love at ctpublic.org/audacious or on your favorite podcast app. Stay in touch with me on the socials at Kyone Wolf, and you can always send an email to audacious@ctpublic.org. Thanks for listening.